Hi, it's Monday morning. This week, my wife is still sitting Shiva and today's for her brother, Mark. And today's podcast on Haftarah, I want to take a look at the Haftarah. I just opened it up. It's being sponsored again by someone anonymously, very nice person, in acknowledgement of Mark's many cheseds and so forth that he did for a lot of people. But we can't go into details about it. Those who know, know. As I said before, he actually was really a very remarkable person. But I guess you had to know him to appreciate it. Otherwise, you think I'm just saying rhetoric. Today we're looking at the Haftarah Parshas Eikev, of course, and it's what Shiva de Nechemta, as you know, the after the things about the three Haftorahs about Peronius, negative. In the 3 weeks, we start the 7, as everyone knows, of Nechama, of comfort. And that's the Jewish history. We certainly had our bad times, but there's followed by better times. Okay? And ultimately, this is the Jewish theological projection of the future, that there will be bad times, but that the last chapter will be good. You understand? In other words, like the dream of the 4 kings, Bavel and Persia and Greece and Rome and all that stuff, and maybe Ishmael, but the end is a happy ending. The trouble is, how do you get to the happy ending? You understand? In other words, it's good to fall asleep in 1939 and wake up in 1945, so to speak, when the war's over. But it's not fun to be there during those years. So similarly, whatever will be in the Messianic era, it won't be fun when it's happening, but at the end, we'll be happy. I just want to take a look today. This is my personal opinion, what I'm sharing over here. My reading of the Haftarah, this passage in Isaiah 49, 50, and 51. So it's my responsibility and so forth. In light of current science, and just an idea that's struck me for many years, but I'm just sharing this with you. And that's as follows. They take a look at the Haftarah today, which is Vatomer Zion Azavani. Zion says, God has forgotten me, and so on and so forth. So if you read, I told you 100 times, the Haftarah is always arranged in such a way that's cut and pasted, heavily edited, and you only get the piece of the prophecy that they want to share with the public. So in order to do it right, you have to read the book of Yeshayahu yourself, which of course I strongly recommend for everybody. Read it in English. Read it in English. To tell you the truth, the King James Version ain't bad, Isaiah, most of the time. That's the truth. But you read it, and you'll see that what we have now is part of a longer piece. At the beginning of chapter 49. Now I know you can't go exactly by the chapters, but in other words, at the beginning of the Inyan, it says, "Oh, I call you faraway islands to come to me," and so on and so forth. And Yeshayahu himself, the prophet Isaiah, has something of an experience like Jeremiah, in which God says, "I've chosen you to be my messenger for things, whether you like it or not." And Yirmiyahu is very famous because it's the beginning of Yirmiyahu, and it's also the Haftarah we read. So, I created you when you were still in your womb. You were destined to be a prophet from the time you were born. Some people, listen, we all have our destiny, right? We all have our destiny. How you work that out with free will and so forth and so on, contingency, is a whole discussion. But we have a destiny. Some people, their destiny is more written out beforehand. Okay, that's how it goes, and we're more clearly written out. And in Yeshayahu, just before our Haftarah, it says, "V'atom Hashem yotzri mi beten," He who created me from the womb. In other words, I was, conceived with this in mind. God says to me, "Le'evid lo, l'shovei Yaakov Elov v'Yisrael lo Yosef." So I was already chosen to be a messenger and to prophesy and to predict the future. And the whole of humankind, certainly Western civilization, is familiar with the prophecies of Isaiah, as we know. And anyway, that's how it goes. Now, what he's saying over there is, things will be good. Things will be good. You had it bad, but things will be good. And the Jewish people will be brought there to Israel, a lot of prosperity, ruchnius, and so on and so forth. The fascinating thing is that the prophet says, and this is what I'm trying to set this up for you to understand the Haftarah. When the final Geula happens, or something like that, Mashiach, however it works, the Jews will be in a state of yi'ush, meaning most Jews will have given up. Either given up in the sense that they stay from and they pay lip service to the idea to be a gula, but they don't really think it's going to happen, or it won't happen in their time. So not really fulfilling like the Rambam says. You say it, but they don't really think so. Others will be like the secular Zionists. It's not happening unless we do it. And others, most Jews, I guess, would say, I'm not interested in being Jewish anymore. I mean, it's not going to happen. It's a fantasy. You understand? Live in the world of reality. In the world of reality, I'll live in America, I'll live in England, I'll live here, I'll live there, and I'll live my life. But all these prophecies about return and Geula and Mashiach and so forth and so on, they're just old religious thoughts from long ago. We know better today. So the number of people that are really, really, really believe Ani Mammon in the real sense, insignificant, if any. The Haftarah begins with Zion, the land of Israel itself, and the Jewish people it represents, saying, listen, it's not happening. But Azavani Hashem, God has abandoned me. It's left me. Hashem Shechani forgot about me. In other words, that's how they feel. Now, don't tell me, how can you say God forgets and so on and so forth. When it comes to how people feel how they feel. You can't ask them a question. How can you feel like that? It's philosophically incoherent. You understand? How can you ascribe to God forgetfulness or things like that? And how can you say he won't keep his promises? People feel like that. You understand? And I get it. And it's easy when you're sitting, Bachlenu Asir Basar, as they say, and, in a prosperous situation, you just look at the Haftarah for a Dvar Torah here or there or something, and you say, well, it doesn't make any sense, and, how could the Pasuk say? He's telling you the way it's going to be, baby. You understand? People are going to say, it ain't happening, and get over it, okay? Now, the thing is, that's very interesting, because I would say today, a lot of Klal Yisrael has given up hope. Let's be honest. Ruba the Ruba don't believe this stuff. You understand? And I'm talking about the non-frum. Among the frum, I'm not even going there. It's an uncomfortable question. Now, and then the prophecy goes on to say, no, don't say that. Don't say that. But Tomer Tzion on Hashem, where is it over here? God said, I won't forget you just any more than a mother can forget a child. Blah, blah, blah. Bring them over here. Open your eyes. And they'll come a kibbutz from all over the world. And when they come back, the ruined and desolate land of Israel, right? The stuff that's torn down. It'll be too small. So the people coming back, there won't be enough room in Eretz Yisrael for all the Jews. And that's like a big theme in this Haftarah. And the people even say, oh, Yom Baznach b'nei Shikulayich, Sarli Hamakam, Gisholi Be'esheva. Right? And the people will say, your children born in bereavement, the children born in Shikulayich, born in bereavement. No, those Yidden who were created and born and lived their lives in the time of Golis, they'll say, Sarli Hamakam, the place is too small for us. Give us more space to live in. Okay? So, today, half the Jewish people live in Israel. About half. There's about 15, 16 million Jews today. Around the same amount, maybe a little less than there was in 1939, before the Holocaust. Think about that. About half of them, 7 million, 7.5 million live in Israel, which is, I've said, is something happened in my lifetime. No one thought it would be that way. It's not yet Rove, it's not 51% of Jewish people, it's close to it. Suppose I told you, I'm just making this up. Suppose I told you that the Arabs will move out of Israel and the Jews from America and the rest of the world will move in. I imagine if you take all the Arabs living in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the state of Israel, I'm talking about in some kind of messianic situation, not now. And people will do this without any force, out of conviction. So that would work. In other words, the area of the state of Israel today, even though it doesn't include Ava, Yarden, and all the other stuff, 15 or 16 million Jews with modern economy and technology and that sort of stuff. My understanding is that they don't even need the Jordan River because you have the desalination you could do for the Mediterranean Sea. Think about that. I'm told that Israel is one of the number one countries when it comes to water stuff, water preservation or water supply, and other countries go and study them. So what does it mean? Kator Tetzim Yosha, won't be enough room. And it seems, best as I can tell, in the Messianic era, not today, in the Messianic era, the prophet Yeshayahu is saying, people say, we need more room. Right? That's what the pasuk says. The Od Yomru Baznech Bnei Shikolayich, the children of those who were bereaved, who lost children, Sarli Hamokim, there's not enough room here. Yeshali Ve'esheva, right? Give me more space to live in. And we have here, I'll get right to it. And I hesitate to say this because now with all the propaganda going back and forth in the Israel-Gaza war and the Israel-Arab conflict altogether, so I see all the time, because I'm a masochist, and I sometimes look at the Arab podcasts or things online to know what the other side is saying. And they always talk about the fact that Israel has a greater Zionist project or something like that, in which they want to physically, the state of Israel today, they are enemies charged, want to annex all the land between the Nile River on the one hand and the Euphrates River on the other. That's a fantasy, but they believe it. Matter of fact, I recall when Sadat, back in 1977, I think it was, late in 77, one of his famous trip to Israel, went to Knesset. He walked into Knesset, which is a shocker. And he said, where's the map? He said, what map? He said, the map of the greater Israel. And it's supposed to be Menachem Mitzrayim on the Har Pros, roughly from the Nile to the Euphrates, meaning that Israel will include half of Egypt and the Sinai and what we call today Israel, and and Gaza and the West Bank and Syria and Lebanon and Jordan. That's about it. Right? And all that would be state of Israel. And that's all part of the Jewish plan. News to us. But in the biblical sense, it's not news to you, because Abraham has promised that you'll have the heirs of Kenizi and all this sort of thing, and to go up to the Nile Pros. So here we get to the question of the borders of Israel. As we all know, in Bayis Rishon period of Yoshua ben Nun, they certainly didn't take everything that they were told to take, including Lebanon, which is just interesting, and the Gaza Strip also, which is just interesting. But there was no thing about taking up Aram and Syria and all this other kind of business. But we're told over here that the need by the expanded population will be so much that people say, "Sar li amakom g'shali be'sheva." You have to, we need more room. And the prophet goes on in this Haftarah to make a big deal out of that, because he says, where are all these people coming from, right? Where is it over here? Let me see. For Amart Bilvavit, the next pasuk, Mi Yolad Liyasela, that Sion will say, where did they get all these children from? Vanishchol v'galmuda, I was busted and in mourning and avelis, and alone, Gola v'sura, exiled and childless and wandering to and fro. Megiddo, ve'ela Megiddo, hein, right? Hey, Megiddo. Who raised all these children? I don't know where they're coming from. Hein anim nisharti levadi. I've always been alone. Eila efohem. Where'd they from? Right? So I'll tell you right now what I think. And this is my opinion. That is, now you got the DNA, you have the new modern genetics, which is going through revolutionary developments. I'm not a scientist, obviously, very obviously, but I see that genetics is going through amazing technological advancements. And so what I think, in other words, I'm suggesting this. By the time Mashiach comes, part of the process of the Gula is a velt of people out there who are not Jewish, or Goyim, will discover that they're Jewish. The only way that could possibly we know this in theory. For example, so many Jews were forced to convert in Spain, just to give you one example. But it's true in many other places. Believe me, when the Muslims took over a lot of areas, they forced a lot of people to convert, if you know the history well, here and there. What happened to the descendants of these people? They literally became not Jewish. By that I mean, listen to what I'm about to tell you. What does it mean you're not Jewish, or you're not American, or you're not French, or something like this? It's how you think of yourself. So to use the current expression in the 21st century, how do you identify? I'll use that. How do you identify? So suppose somebody, for example, is a Tinnik Shenishba. Here's a good one. From the Holocaust. X number of kids, lots of them, were saved by, let's say in Eastern Europe or France or Germany, by non-Jews who raised them as Christians. You know these stories. We've heard about them. And they're true. And I imagine that the parents who raised these children as non-Jews thought they're doing them a favor. Poland, Lithuania, they were. France, other countries. And there was that cardinal in Paris who, but he knew he was originally Jewish. He converted sincerely. So these people, let's say, for example, and that's recent, when they're growing up, they identify as not Jewish. That's how they feel about themselves. A guy today who's descended from the conversos, the Jews who were forced to convert in Spain in 1391 or 1490 or something like that, and has been Catholic for hundreds of years. They may or may not be aware of what their ancestry is, but they identify as Spanish Catholics or Portuguese Catholics. That's how they identify, and that's how they feel in their kishkas. I get it. And what seems to me be going over here, and this is one of the Shiva de Nechemta, supposed to be in the Nechama, that, let's say, and I'm making this up, of course, the DNA will be of such a nature that people in Spain or Belgium or this place or that place, or Turkey or Iran, because there's a belt of Jews over the centuries been forced to convert, and things like women were carried off, raped, and became slaves in harems of this Arab and that Arab, this Turk and that Turk. It happened, whether you like it or not. It's a sad part. Or these people in Ukraine today in Ukraine, fighting the Russians. Okay, the reason I say Ukraine has a long history of the Kazakhs carrying off Jewish women and violating them and so on and so forth. So how many people, and this happened a lot, what I'm about to tell you. Khmelnytsky, for example, it's not the only case, I'm just coming to mind. Didn't the Kazakhs carry up a belt of Jewish women and keep them? And what happened to them? The women were just in a sad situation. That's how they lived the rest of their lives. Not everybody has one of these Pirkei story tales that they escaped. And they came to be, Ukrainian. And their kids was raised as Kazakhs and so on and so forth. And then their children were, and their children were. But really, 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 they go back to, Zera Yisrael, as we would say today. Now comes the DNA, or whatever comes the next thing past the DNA, and they discover they're Jewish. You don't know how this plays. Either they can shock them, and they can say like this, I don't want to even acknowledge it, I don't want to deal with it, because I've never identified that way, and I don't like Jews, and so on and so forth. That's one possibility. And that has certainly happened over the course of Jewish history many times, and I understand it. I get it. Alternatively, someone can say, as happened not that long ago in Hungary with the leader of the Nazi party in Hungary, who discovered he was Jewish. You remember this story? It was even in all the, I don't know, what do you call it, the Mishpacha magazine, that kind of thing, Ami magazine. I forget the guy's name. And now I think he's a Lubab. I'm very serious. If I remember correctly, Chabad got to him, which is a good thing. And, he was putting on tefillin. So notice he changed how he identified. On Monday, he identified as a Nazi. This is a true story I'm telling you. It happened right now. Last couple of years, 10 years, whatever. One day he identified as a Nazi. The next day he identified as a Lubavitcher Chassid or a Satmar Chassid or a guy in Panovich. We have such stories in the Gemara in a screwball way. B'nai Banav Shel Hamid Lamdu Torah B'nai Brak. And the guy who burned the base of Mikdash down, Nero and Kesar, and Nebuzaradan, at least according to Chazal, they went and converted. Now that's different. They're not Jewish biologically, but they converted to Jews. I'm talking about the other way around. These people will return. And that's why Tzion is saying, where did these people come from? So let's say, for argument's sake, again, I read the words. How did it go over here? In the time of Mashiach. Who bore me these children? I didn't know they're Jewish. Tzion is saying I was, bereft. Okay, I lost my. How's he put over here? I lost my children. I was childless, exiled and wandering to and fro. Where do these people come from? And the prophecy goes on in our. Isn't it a remarkable Haftarah? And the prophecy goes on to say, "Kom Hashem Esel Goyim Yadiv El Ami Mar Nisi." So you'll say like this: I will beckon to the nations, God says. The prophet says, God says. I will lift up my banner to the peoples. They will bring your sons in their arms and carry your daughters in their hips. Isn't that a heck of a pasuk? They'll bring your sons in their arms and carry your daughters in their hips. Meaning they're yours, biologically. Notice they come from Avraham Avinu. They come from Jews. But they were your children, in other words, but they've been Spanish, Ukrainian, Turkish, Moroccan, whatever you want, for many, many generations. And now, in light of the Messianic events, and I would say today, in light of modern science, it's not so far-fetched, they're going to bring them to you, meaning that they will. And how does God describe this? Where is it over here? Oh yeah, what's the lashon? I'll raise my. Here we go. Esel yodim yodi. God said, I'll raise my hand to the nations. Now he doesn't have a hand, so what does it mean raise the hand to the nations? I would say it means that he'll bring new science to the knowledge of the human race, and that's one of the ways God can manifest His will in the world to cause people to have a completely different way of thinking about things, including personal identity. Vel amim marim nisi, and I'll raise my banner to the amim through science. And the results will be that a lot of people yesterday were fighting us will come to the other side. So I can't say it now, but I'll say it anyway. Maybe the Hamas people find that they're Jewish and they'll switch sides. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen today, but this is the kind of subject that our Haftarah deals with. That's why it's so fascinating. Okay? And people will be shocked. I mean, if it turned out, like I say before, that, how should I put it over here? That such a thing would happen, you wouldn't believe it. Okay? And the Goyim also be shocked. It fits very well. Because the pasuk goes on to say, in our Haftarah, can plunder be taken from warriors or captives be rescued from the fierce? These people are totally Russian, totally German. They were Nazis, or Spanish, or Moroccan, or Libyan, or this, that. Remember, Gaddafi comes from such a thing. Right? I mean, from a whole wide variety of people, 70 nations. Can plunder be taken from warriors or captives rescued from the fierce? If I were to tell you, again, I'm obviously making this up, the head of Iran or the head of the Hezbollah or something is going to switch sides when they discover who they are. How's that possible? The only way it's possible that strikes me is through a change in consciousness. So I can defeat you in one of two ways. Either we have a battle, I shoot you, or something like that. That's one way, no question about it. That's called the history of warfare. Another way is to change your consciousness. If I'm the German army, you're in the French army, you're going to fight me, and I convince you somehow or other, really, you're German, you're coming to my side. I defeat it by changing the way you what's the right word? Evaluate reality. You see, you just have a new take on reality. And that's part of the enlightenment that's going to be part of the Messianic era. The Rambam even speaks in these terms. Because the pasuk goes on to say like this. Yes, the prophet says, captives will be taken from warriors. Yes, it will happen. And plunder will be taken from fierce. I, Hashem, will contend with those who contend with you. Meaning by changing the way they think of themselves. And your children I will save. Your children I will save. In other words, no matter who you are, even if you're head of Auschwitz, if it turns out I'm right, your descendants I will save. I'll make your opponents eat their own flesh. That's the next pasuk, right? I will make your oppressors eat their own flesh and drink their own blood as wine. You get it? How we eat your own flesh. They'll say, what the heck is going over here? These people are Germans. These people are Ukrainians. These people are Hamas. These people are Palestinians, something like that. And if it turns out that they identify as Jewish, I'm like eating my own flesh. You get it? Be the biggest shock. And he goes on to say at the end of the Haftarah, um, again, it just strikes me very remarkable because then you go to chapter 51, and it says, where is it over here? It's remarkable. 51, I say. Shimoele Rofe said Mavakshi Hashem. Habitul Tzurcha Saftem Belmakevis Bornu Kartem. Habitul Avram Avichem Belsart Cholelchem. It's extraordinary. Listen to me, those of you who pursue righteousness and who seek the Lord. Look at the rock from which you were cut, and look at the quarry from which you were hewn. Look at the rock from which you were cut, and look from the quarry from which you were hewn. In other words, that's how you change your consciousness. You realize, hey, I'm Jewish. And I haven't known this for 20 generations, maybe. But I realize it now, and I don't look at my father, my grandfather, I look at my original ancestors. Before my ancestor was raped by some Cossack in the 17th century, something like that, right? Or some Egyptian taskmaster, whenever, long ago. Look to Abraham, your father, and Sarah, who gave you birth. When I called him, he was only one man, I blessed him, made him many. So what does that mean? If what I just said will happen, then people are going to look back to who they come from ultimately. And that means it's going to be Avram and Sarah. Habikto el Avram avichem el Sarah ticholelchem. Sarah who gave you birth. If this revolution in consciousness of self ever takes place, in other words, I'm doing everything today, this is just what I think. I haven't seen anybody say this. If what I said is what I'm suggesting turns out true, then you'll see that the Rebbeinu Shalom can defeat an enemy without firing a shot, without lifting a sword. All you have to do is just change the way somebody thinks about themselves. You understand? Change the way somebody thinks of themselves. So the mind games is like everything, the ultimate weapon of war. Right now, as you know, the war in Gaza and all the rest of it is a major battle in the physical, it's also major in the mind games. Unfortunately, the bad guys have gotten to the minds of many Jews, and you know, they're all supporting Hamas and all this kind of stuff. They're voting for this Mamdani guy in New York. You know the news like I know the news. That's because how they identify, how they think. If you could change how they think, everybody's complaining that Israel is bad propaganda, which is 100% true. You don't know how to appeal to the mind of the audience. Everything depends on that. In the Messianic era, we're told in this Haftarah, Shiva de Nechemta, one of the Chama, God will make this happen, and when it happens, it'll be a game changer. And then all of a sudden, instead of saying there are 15 million Jews in the world, there might be 50 or 100 million Jews in the world, or 200 million if you follow what I'm saying. And then it'll make sense that people say, I guess we don't have enough room. And then you'll start to see Yerushalayim will extend to Damascus, and Minacham Mitzrayim on the Har Pros, and who knows what. That'll be interesting times to live in. We say, the beginning of the Messianic process can happen any minute. That doesn't mean the total playing out of the Messianic process will happen any minute. The commencement, you're supposed to believe, will happen any minute. But there are a period of time, I think, that the events will unfold, and it'll be one amazing period of time. So we always hope we should see it, or let's put it this way, we hope we're there for the good stuff, not necessarily for the wars and the bad stuff over there. So it would be nice if everything I just said today happens in a peaceful way. That would be, devoutly to be wished for. Again, I want to thank our very generous anonymous sponsor for sponsoring the podcast today about the Haftarah in Zecha Nishmas, memory of my brother-in-law, Mark Hedelman, who certainly deserved it. And the donor himself indirectly was a beneficiary of his chesed, and many others were. And the Sham Shabbat Aliyah, thank you very much.